I am Tracy, as you may know or may not know, and I am here with Pauline, who has been busy getting all this technical stuff organised, because I have not a clue about that. So thank you, first and foremost, for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Beautiful venue. And yes, I want you to, I'm not going to say too much, because I'm being recorded and I can talk a lot, so I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I'm going to introduce Chris though. So Chris Coverdale is a peace activist, behavioural scientist and former governance consultant. Yeah? And he was working for 30 years as an organisation development advisor and now focuses on exposing corrupt procedures. Okay, practices. So, he set up ProbityCo, who are an independent voluntary group of people across the UK who advocate for resistance on war tax, choosing peace and justice instead. So, that's right, okay. I've written some notes down. Yeah, but my notes are terrible. Absolutely shocking. So, I have been following Chris for a couple of years. And as you know, anybody that's been involved in common knowledge, I done a talk exactly a year ago, actually, on the council tax. So, I avoid tax at all costs. It's voluntary. Okay, we don't have to pay it. I'm not going to talk about that tonight, but Chris is going to give you another slant on it. And it's a slant that we all should be looking at, because this is the most important reason why we should not be paying tax in this country, because we're funding terrorism and genocide. So, over to Chris, because he's the man. And yes.
Thank you, Tracy. We're just going to start off with a short introductory film from our website that puts this into context.
The top 50,000 people in this country, they hide their money overseas in tax havens in trusts. They put them in trust. So when you put something in trust, it doesn't belong to you anymore and you don't have to pay tax. So I thought, well, we can use the same system of putting our taxes in trust in this country on condition that none of the money will be used for criminal purposes, in particular war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, warfare. One of the things I had discovered in relation to the laws of war was that we had signed up to the UN Charter in 1945, and now there are 195 nations have agreed never to threaten or use force and to settle all disputes peacefully. Those are the primary agreements of the UN Charter. Britain, of course, just doesn't agree with any of it. It is a criminal offence to pay tax, knowing that some of the money will be used for a criminal purpose. You are committing a crime of aiding and abetting genocide and so on. If you can prove to me that tax is excluded from the offences in sections 15 to 17 of the Terrorism Act, and Section 52 of the International Criminal Court Act, then I will pay the tax. They can't prove that because there is nothing in the law and plenty of evidence and precedents to say, yes, this does apply to the British government. The Supreme Court case, for instance. Well, we've got to use the same system they use against us, against them. A 4-page document which goes into the detail of setting up a personal trust related to your tax. It's called a Declaration of Sovereignty and Deed of Discretionary, Revocable, Conditional Trust and Withdrawal of Consent to Illegal or Mandatory Taxation. You sign one of these bits of paper, and it says, okay, I'm putting my council tax into trust. So I'll pay £2,000, whatever it is, council tax. I put it in trust, but it's on condition that you meet my conditions. And if you meet my conditions, you can have the money, and my trustee will hand it over to you. And if you don't meet the conditions by the last day of the financial year, this is revoked, and the money goes to the secondary beneficiary. And the secondary beneficiary is you. And they come back to me and say, well, none of it is used for criminal purposes. And I said, well, you don't even know your own process. When I pay the money to the council, that account of the council is owned by the government. It's not yours as councillors. It goes into, along with about maybe 3,000 other accounts, is the total amount of money that's called the consolidated fund. And that has been the case since 1787. Every tax, capital gains tax, VAT, income tax, 230 different sources of money that go into the consolidated fund. It applies to all of them. I did get a parking ticket somewhere in Hastings, and I wrote to them and said, look, no, I'm not going to pay it because it's a criminal offence. Section 52 of the International Criminal Court Act, and it's a criminal offence for you to ask for it. And I got a polite letter back saying, on this occasion, we will not carry out. Think about your responsibilities to the running of the country. And we do have responsibilities, you know, homeschooling, for instance. I'm supporting a homeschooling unit in Sussex called Hope. I put some money into that to make sure that I'm starting to show that I'm not just refusing it in order to make money for me, but I actually want to contribute to a better world. We can reverse the control in this country from the government controlling us to us controlling the government. We've got to not just accept what's happening to us or escape from it, but we've actively got to push back at them. In a democracy, we are in charge. We are sovereign. It's not Parliament, it's not the government, it's not the monarch, it's us. And it's time to take back our power and start to say, no, I refuse, I will not do this. You declare your sovereignty every time you take an action. So you must reassert it every day in some way or another. And the best way of doing it is through non-payment of tax for criminal purposes. Tax rebellion has been the single most important principle underlying all the successful rebellions in history. Magna Carta started with the tax rebellion. And the same with the English Civil War, American independence, French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, Gandhi's salt tax rebellions, the Glasgow women's rent strike in 1915, and the poll tax in late 80s. The key issue is to take back our power. We have the power all the time, every one of us, to stop giving our consent to what's going on. Every time you pay tax, you give your tacit consent to how the money will be spent by the government. So stop paying it.
Thank you very much. So if we could have the lights up a little bit, that'd be great. We need to have a look at, I'm going to work through this document. Thank you very much, that's perfect. So a little bit more about me. I've been, as I say, an anti-war activist since I discovered in 2002 it's a criminal offence to wage war. And we have been conned for 75 or 50 years at that time, it's now 78 years, over the illegality of war. Our government constantly tells us that war is legal. And so when we went into the Iraq, for instance, the Attorney General and the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, said, well, this has been authorised by the UN Security Council operating under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. Now, I knew it by that time. I knew quite a lot about that. I had started to look at what does the law actually say. So in 2002, when we were in Afghanistan, murdering Afghan men, women and children, I looked at the UN Charter. They said it's lawful. And there are very important statements in the UN Charter. The first one is that we promised the whole world we would never threaten or use force, and we would settle all our disputes peacefully. That's what it says in the UN Charter. It's a public document available to everybody in the world. And yet our government constantly breaches that. And we've been breaching it every year since 1945. We've fought 83 illegal conflicts, wars, if you like, since 1945, murdering somewhere between 8 and 10 million people, a third of whom were children. And all of that was authorised by our government, supposedly working on our behalf, supposedly upholding the agreements of the UN Charter. Now, I just want to refer to, you will find quite a lot of the things I refer to in here. On the second page of this, I'd just like to draw your attention to item number 6, and the third statement in it, which is Article 41 of the UN Charter. This is the article that's built into the law of England and Wales and the law of Scotland. And what it says is very important. The Security Council may decide what measures not involving the use of armed force are to be employed to give effect to its decisions. Now, the British government leaves out the word not and tells us that our wars have been authorised by the Security Council. I find that unbelievable. When I first discovered that, I could not believe it. And they're still doing it today. Constantly telling us that what they're doing overseas, using our money, is lawful. And it's necessary. And so we're supporting the genocide in Gaza and the genocide in Ukraine and the genocide in the Yemen, all of which we'll go into in more detail, but all of which are the worst criminal offences it's possible to commit. So when I discovered this in 2002 and 3, and since then I've discovered much more. I've been working on these laws for some since 2002, so it's 22 years now. I initially thought, well, surely there must be lawyers in this country who know what the law says. But I was horrified to find there isn't a single war law lawyer in this country who isn't employed by the British government. Because you can't earn a living by being a war law lawyer. And so what happens is the government employs 26 or 27 lawyers in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and they do what the government tells them to do, not telling us what the law actually says. They just say, OK, we'll find a way around this, and we will ensure that what we are doing, you are OK, and we'll find a legal route by which you can do this. But that is rubbish. Every single war we've fought, apart from one, since 1945, has been illegal under the agreements we made in the UN Charter. And we've made more and more agreements. Actually, the first time we agreed it was after the First World War in 1928. We agreed the Coverdale Pact, which, because of the horrors of the First World War and the deaths in the trenches and so on, Frank Kellogg and Aristide Briand, who was the foreign minister in France and the Secretary of State in America, got together as many powers of the world and agreed the Convention for the Renunciation of War, which became known as the Coverdale Pact. I don't know how many people have heard of that before. Can you just put your hands up if you have? 1, 2, that's interesting, 3. So there's 3 people in here who know about the world's most important law. We have never been told about it. We are never educated about it and so on. So one of the purposes tonight is to ensure that you go away really understanding the laws we have agreed with the rest of the world, because if you don't understand what they say, you can't uphold them. And so it is very important to spread the word about what the law actually says. and how our government has been deceiving us for 75 years over that. So what I wanted to do was, very briefly, I stopped paying tax because, as well as finding war was illegal, I discovered that funding war was illegal and was a similar offence to waging it or starting it or fighting it or supplying it or whatever. So I stopped paying tax in 2003. I realised it was a criminal offence for me to aid and abet what was going on in Afghanistan and Iraq. We were murdering men, women and children who had never done anything wrong. We just murdered them. So I stopped paying tax, and I did so for about 10 years around London. In the particular tax I stopped was council tax, because that was the easiest, biggest sum of money, which I could say, no, you're not having any of my money. Most taxes are taken at source before you ever get your hands on them. So anyway, I did that for 10 years, and I managed to avoid being sent to prison. However, in 2013, I moved to Rye in Sussex. And I was there I went to a town meeting. And in the town meeting, they said, we really do need a scrutiny group to have a look at what's happening in the town council and the district council and the county council and so on, because we're not sure it's all straight. And I said, well, look, I've been investigating fraud and corruption for many years, and so I'll take part in this group. So I did, and I wrote a report of what I found. And there was 9 major crimes going on that I found in the period of about 4 weeks, including a £32 million fraud by Rother District Council, introducing a tax which they had no authority to introduce on new housing. And so we had young people having to spend an extra £15,000 to £20,000, which was going towards, it was called the Community Infrastructure Levy. You may have heard it, but it's mainly England and Wales and not Scotland. So anyway, discovered this and various other things, and I pointed it out in a report, including the corruption by our MP, who at that time was a woman called Amber Rudd, who later became the Home Secretary. I had 4 very rough meetings with her. She wouldn't pay a single attention to anything I said. She used to come up with statements like, when you call yourself a lawyer, which university did you get your law degree from? And I said, I haven't been to university and I haven't got a law degree. Oh, well, we don't want to pay any attention to this, And this is then public meetings. Anyhow, all of this led to, about a week later, they sent me to prison for non-payment of council tax after I had been not paying it for 11 years. And I was saying, look, this is what the law says. It's a criminal offence for me to hand the money to you, a criminal offence for you to ask for it in the first place, and a criminal offence for you to collect it, and a criminal offence for you to hand that money to the Revenue and Customs. Of course, they paid no attention to that at all. The judge in the second time I was sent said to me, that law doesn't apply in this court. And I thought, this is crazy. It's the most important laws we've ever signed up to, and our judges and courts are so damn corrupt that we get nowhere. Anyway, all of that led me to, and then in the third year I was sent to prison again because I kept on trying to make sure somebody would uphold the law, but nobody did. So I thought, well, I've got to find a different way. This is ridiculous, going backwards and forwards into that court. I was telling some people, actually, it wasn't too bad because I'd been sent at the age of 8 to a Catholic monastic boarding school. And actually, this experience of the worst prison in this country, Lewis Prison, was actually better than the Catholic monastic boarding school. But that's another matter. Anyway, so in the light of all of that, I thought, well, okay, I've got to find a different way. And that's when I really started to investigate, how do our leaders hide their money from us and being taxed? And the top 50,000 to 100,000 people in this country put their money into trusts in the Cayman Islands or Guernsey or Jersey or wherever it is. And they don't get taxed. And so we have to pay huge taxes all the damn time, and the top people with the most money are not paying any taxes at all often. It is appalling. So I thought, well, what we need to do is to use the same system that they use against us, against them. Sorry?
Saul Alinsky.
Yes.
Not the radicals.
Absolutely. It's a very good book, that. I recommend it to everybody.
Brilliant.
Rule for Radicals. So I then started to put my money in, my taxes in trust. So council tax, I put it in trust. That was in 2017. And I'm pleased to say that they haven't sent me to prison again since 2017, because when they look at the the trust that I've set up, it's designed in such a way that if they take me to court and challenge what I've done, they will lose. And that means that every taxpayer in this country will be officially, they will have to refuse to pay taxes whilst the government continues to use our money for criminal purposes. Now, I'll go through the detail of this in a minute, but that's the sort of how it all came about. And it is now proving successful. So about just under 2 years ago, I started to spread this around other people. We've got somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people individually signing these trust documents, putting their money in trust on condition that the council or the DVLA or the Revenue and Customs can have the money as soon as they prove that none of it will be used for a criminal purpose and all of it will be used lawfully. And they can't do that. And I want to make sure that by going through this document, you'll understand every word of that by the end of tonight. So that what we want to end up with tonight is for you, each of you, with one of these documents, to be able to set up your own taxation trust. This is an official document. We've now tested it. I improve it every year, and it's getting better and better. And by working through it, understanding it, signing it, and having a witness, a non-family member, witness your signature, from that moment onwards, you have put all your taxes in trust for the government, for the councils, for the Scottish Government, whoever it is. So that from then on, you are protected in law from committing a criminal offence of handing money to a government, knowing that it will be used to murder men, women and children in Afghanistan or Iraq, or now currently in Gaza, in the Yemen, in the Ukraine. And that's what they do with our money. So that's the context of what we want to do tonight. And I want to make sure that, has everybody got a copy of this so that we go through it? If you haven't, there are one or two over there. Oh, somewhere. We'll find it. Oh, right, great. So you're okay with it. So I want to work through it in detail. So if what I'll do is just work through it, and if you have questions, please do ask. Now, the important bit from a Scottish point of view in particular is I've included in it this declaration of sovereignty. And the reason for that is that we are all sovereign human beings. We take the decisions. It's not the government. It's not Parliament. It's not the monarch. It's us. We decide how our money should be spent. That's what a sovereign human being is all about. And I know there is a big movement in Scotland for independence. And so I really see this as a very quick route. If we can get lots of Scots signing up to these documentation and stop paying tax to the Westminster Parliament, very quickly we'll get to the point at which we can declare independence from England and Wales and Northern Ireland and run our own affairs. And that's what my understanding has been for the Scottish National Party and the Alba Party. That's what they're trying to do. But what I've realised is that politics, there's no way this government will ever grant that independence to the people of Scotland. All independence has to be taken, not granted and given. And that's what the Americans did with the Declaration of Independence. There was a tax, the stamp duty, stamp tax I think was the main one, and tea taxes, and imposed by King George, and they said no, we're not going to pay any taxes unless you grant us representation in Parliament. That was the first stage, and that was turned down. So they said we are claiming independence, and there was wars and all sorts of other things, but it succeeded. And the important bit is that in the early days they were very keen to uphold the law of England at that time and do things lawfully and so on, but they just couldn't, because the government at the time was determined to keep everybody under its control. And what we need now is to have a method where every one of us takes the decisions and they control nothing. We take our own decisions. So that's what this document's all about. So it's a declaration of sovereignty. Being a living man or woman of sound mind, I declare and say as follows. And then we go through the detail. I'd just like to go through the heading first. So it's also a declaration and deed of revocable conditional trust and withdrawal of consent to mandatory taxation, or you could substitute that with illegal taxation. But the deed of revocable conditional trust is the important bit. They've been running these trusts for many years and hiding all their money overseas and getting away with it. And one of the reasons they do that is that when you put your money in trust, it no longer belongs to you. And therefore you can't get taxed on it, or you can't deal with it. The trustees have to deal with it according to your conditions. So a typical one, when most of us will be aware of it, is when you put your money in a will, say for your grandson. If I put my money and grant him £1,000, I was going to say 100,000, but I don't have that money. I was made bankrupt as well as many other things by the government. But say in a normal case, you can put your money in trust for your grandson on condition that he doesn't marry Sally and he joins the family firm or whatever it is you want to do. And if he does that, then he gets the £100,000. And if he doesn't, your trustees are by law and you have to put the money to the secondary beneficiary in your trust deed. So it's best to have, if you put conditions, a primary beneficiary and a secondary beneficiary. And this is what this does, because what we're doing here is putting all our taxes in trust for the government. The councils, the local regional councils, the regional governments, everybody. So you put the money in trust for them, saying, okay, I'm very happy to pay it, but only on those conditions. And I've written the conditions in, and we'll go through them. They're on the back page, trust conditions, you'll see. But we'll go through those in detail. So, revocable, that's also important. Irrevocable means it carries on regardless until it is completed, whatever the trust is about. Revocable means that you have the power to revoke the conditions if some of the conditions aren't met. And one of the conditions that is put into this trust is that it applies until the end of the financial year. So until April the 5th, if they meet your conditions, they can have the money. Your trustee is bound by law to pay the money to them. If, however, on April the 6th, they haven't met the conditions, then the trustee cuts them out of any possibility of getting the money in the future and say, we rescind all your rights to any money from me because you've been using the money for criminal purposes. To Mr. Coverdale. It's me with another hat on. And, excuse me, so that on that date, on the 6th of April, the trustee is obliged to pass the money to the secondary beneficiary. And if you look through the document to the last page, somewhere in there, you'll see that under Article 22, it says that primary beneficiary's right to the money will be automatically revoked and the money will be returned to the secondary beneficiary, in brackets, the settler. Now, the settler is you. You settle money in trust. You are also the trustee. This sounds a bit dodgy, but it's not. You can be a trustee of your own trust, and you can be a secondary beneficiary. You cannot be the primary beneficiary. So it's important to remember that. Otherwise, you'll be prosecuted for fraud.
Can you say that again? Sorry, you can be the secondary.
You can be the secondary. Well, basically, you can be the settler. You settle money in trust. You can also be the trustee of your own trust. And if you want to, you can add trustees so that it makes it tighter and tighter. But you cannot be the primary beneficiary because that's the government. But you can be the secondary beneficiary. Okay? Now, I believe this is all right. We've put it up to the Revenue and Customs and lawyers all over the place and councils and so on, and they haven't yet been able to disprove it. So basically, what happens is I've been doing this for 7 years now with my council tax, and they ensure that at the end of the year, they send round the bailiffs or they send me demands. They do everything else they try to do to get the money out of me. But I just send them a copy of this and say, I'll put the money in trust. You can have it. I'm delighted you can have it, but just make sure you meet the conditions. And of course they can't, because the conditions are very tough. So very briefly, the conditions, which again are written into the last page, there's 4 important ones. The first one is that the government has ended all involvement in the wars, killings and criminal acts identified at paragraphs 2, 3, 4 and 18 above. Secondly, the government is acting in full accordance with the UN Charter and the UN Declaration on Principles of International Law and the laws specified in paragraphs 6 to 17 above. And we'll go through those in a minute. The third one is the government has initiated, or Parliament has initiated, criminal proceedings against the leading instigators, perpetrators, bankers, financiers, investors, advisors, company directors, public officials, and natural persons complicit in the criminal acts of the primary beneficiary identified in paragraph 18 above. So this includes Boris Johnson and Tony Blair, Jack Straw, all the rest of them. They have been breaking the law, and they have been committing the world's worst war crimes, right through to Rishi Sunak and now Keir Starmer. He is one of the worst war criminals this country's ever known. So they're going to find it very difficult to meet these conditions. And that's the important thing. We need to say what we want, and when they're not having a penny of our money until they meet our conditions, rather than the conditions they lay down in the cabinet or the Chancellor of the Exchequer or whatever it is. So anyway, so I have done that for 7 years, and what happens is that I refuse to pay the tax. I got a letter in June of this year saying, according to our records, you owe us £166.98 or something like that. This is after 7 years of not paying anything at all. So if they'd been totting it all up, it would have been £12,000 or something like that. So what happens is, the only way they can get out of this is they write me out of their records and start again every year. And that's happening to a lot of people who've signed up to this. They don't want to take us to court, because if they did, they'd lose. And I can prove they lose by going through the next few pages, all of which are the law that we all need to know and understand. So before I go on to that, any just quick questions or points that people want to raise? If they do, yeah.
When you pay something into trust, where are you paying it? You're paying it to like
I'll come to that in detail, but in brief, what happens is that you put just by signing this document and saying I've done it, you must back that up with a cheque or some cash or a promissory note into a source that is separate from your normal money, because it belongs to your trustee from that moment on, not to you. So you must take it out of your normal bank account and put it somewhere else. But you don't have to put the whole lot somewhere else. 10% is good enough to prove that you are serious in wanting to pay it. And normally, if you've got a large sum of money, they will give you 10 months or a year or whatever it is over a period of time to pay the whole bill. So all we're doing is doing the same to them. So what I do is I put, with a £2,000 bill, I put £200 in cash, in notes, in a strong box in my where I'm staying at the moment, and plus a promissory note or a cheque, which is payable to, say, the council or to the Revenue and Customs, or 2 cheques or 3 cheques, whatever it is, dated the last day of the financial year. So that if they meet it, they won't be able to get my money anyway till the last day of the financial year, but it's there, and they have to prove in detail that they have met every one of those 4 conditions. Otherwise, I just tear the cheque up, or sorry, my trustee tears the cheque up and passes the money back to me. And as I'm both a trustee and the secondary beneficiary, it becomes quite comical at times. So that's the framework. So let's go. Oh, yeah, sorry, there's a question.
I have a question. What's your take on registering it with their trustee registration service?
Yes, I mean, you're supposed to do that as under their laws. I don't pay any attention to their laws because I know it's a criminal offence. And if I actually register this, I'm partly committing a criminal offence of aiding and abetting. So I don't register it. But I do send them a copy of my trustee, always. Now, it is important to remember, never send the original, because that is your instructions to your trustee. But the people who are going to get the money must receive a copy, because they need to know the conditions they've got to meet in order to take your tax money. And if you don't tell them what the conditions are, they are much more likely to be able to take it from you. But if in court they have received this and they take it to court, and you get the court to look through it, then you're pretty safe. Let's put it that way.
So what happens if you're already in a situation where you've given 3 conditional notices to the council, they've completely ignored you and they've sent you to the likes of third party Scott & Co, who do all the fake paperwork and the fake summary warrants behind your back and do an arrestment of earnings with these bank accounts? Because I know they have frozen numerous people's bank accounts here in Scotland. So how do we protect ourselves when they're ignoring the 3-letter notices as well?
Well, the important way of protecting yourself is never pay them a penny. I mean, that's the issue. You can send letters, and I know that there's quite a lot of people who say you have to do 3 letters and so on. That is really under civil law and not criminal law. The big difference between what we're doing here and what they're doing with those 3 letters and so on is this is a criminal offence and not a civil debt that needs to be paid. And that's very different. So all you need to do is send 1 letter plus your document to whoever is demanding money from you. And it could be your energy company, it could be the council, it could be the Revenue and Customs, the DVLA, or whoever it is. Or your pension company, or whatever. Whoever is trying to take money away from you without your permission, you send them a copy of this and a letter saying what you're doing. And there are letters on the website that enable people to download a template that they can adapt to their own particular purposes.
And you can give us your website at the end of the...
I will, yes. I'll give it to you now and again at the end. The website is ProbityCo.com.
Spell that, sorry.
I will. PR for Robert, O for Orange, B for Bertie, I for ink.
B for Bertie.
Bertie. Is that all right?
My motorhome is called Bertie. I was going to ProbityCo.com. ProbityCo.com. And I'll give it to you at the end as well. Yes, question.
I was wondering, how might a solicitor respond to this? I'm in a bit of a situation where I'm in the middle of winding up my mother's estate and some tax has already been paid. Would they
Don't pay another penny. It's very important that, as I said earlier, there are no solicitors or tax accountants in this country who seem to know any of this. Just as it's new to you, it's new to them. No MPs know it. No peers, no courts, judges, lawyers, solicitors, anybody. They're all unintentionally breaking the law, and they need to know that. So if you have a solicitor that you need to bring on board with this, do your best, and if you're still having problems, put them through to me, and I'm happy to spend time on the phone going through it in detail, or come up here again next time to talk to tax accountants and lawyers who are still handing money to the British government. So, basically, we just have to get them to understand. And when we've been through the next 6 pages, we won't spend time on all of it, but you'll understand why we're doing what we're doing. And if we force them to understand it, will start to take account of it.
Yeah, also I've had my bank account frozen like that lady's talking about. So in Scotland they do it slightly differently. If you've not paid your parking fines or your bus lane charges, for example, they actually can freeze your bank account and take the money out. So I don't know how that would...
That's a criminal offence, you see. The point is they have taken your money, and by doing so they have committed a criminal offence of conduct ancillary to genocide. And that has a 30-year prison sentence with it. So when the solicitors start to understand this law, they will stop these orders. Some of the things that are being done in this country at the moment are utterly appalling. But we need to stop them and say, no, this is a criminal offence. I can show you, and we'll go into it in a minute, which law says that this is a criminal offence. And it's particularly the Terrorism Act 2000, sections 15 to 18, are the key ones which apply both in Scotland and England and Wales. And in Scotland, particularly, it's I think it's section 2, article Article 2 of the International Criminal Court Scotland Act, on page 4 of this document, number 12. Let's have a quick look at that right now. That may help.
And then just lastly, presumably people would have had to have a copy of this in advance.
Yes.
Making arrangement of accounts and stuff for it to actually stand.
They must know the conditions they have to meet.
Yes.
So yes, send a copy. So number 12, in 2001, the UK government ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. This is when we set up the International Criminal Court. After 60 years' work, the UN finally got the International Criminal Court set up. The reason for it is that although we have all these good intentions, we have no international law enforcement until 2002, when we set up the International Criminal Court. Now, that court has been prosecuting African leaders, but it now needs to start to prosecute British and European leaders. So we're hoping to get Tony Blair in there the first time. So, as you'll see here, this law makes it a criminal offence in Scotland for a person to engage in war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, or more importantly, conduct ancillary to such crimes. Every time you pay tax, knowing that it'll be used for a criminal purpose, you commit a crime of conduct ancillary to genocide, because you know that some of it will be used. Now, going into that in a little detail, when you buy a cup of coffee for, say, £2 and there's 40p VAT, that 40p goes to the government from the coffee bar, wherever it is, and of that 40p, you know that 5p will be used for military purposes to murder men, women and children. So every time you buy a cup of coffee, you know you are contributing to genocide. It's a horrific point to be made, but it is important. Excuse me. So let's just have a look at that. This is the most important law in Scotland. Article 1, genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes. It shall be an offence for a person to commit genocide, a crime against humanity or a war crime. Point 2, conduct ancillary to genocide. It shall be an offence for a person to engage in conduct ancillary to genocide, a crime against humanity or a war crime. And then we go into, what do they mean by ancillary offence, conduct ancillary to genocide? This is where Scottish law is a bit different from English and Welsh law. Being art and part in the commission of an offence. That's what the law actually says. Inciting a person to commit an offence. And that may be just handing money over. So if you have a council officer who really demands the money from you, they are inciting an offence by you and by them. Attempting or conspiring to commit an offence, and that's what the Scottish Parliament are doing when they authorise money to go for military purposes, or both the English and Welsh, English Parliament, British Parliament at Westminster. Number 4, perverting the course of justice in connection with an offence. Now that's the one I'm hoping to get Keir Starmer prosecuted under, because I've been reporting war crimes to the police, all 44 forces in the UK since 2003. And we've done it on more than 300 occasions, myself and my colleagues, in Make War History and other organisations. And of those 330 attempts, 5 of them went as far as the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity unit at Scotland Yard. Now, has anybody heard of that unit? And yet this is the unit that is supposed to prosecute genocide. I didn't know about it until I, happened to find out about it. But it's 5 times it's gone to them. And the first time they rang me up one day, 2 of my colleagues had reported this in Marylebone police station, and luckily there was a Danish policewoman on the desk, and she was on a 1-year transfer arrangement with Denmark. And she got this and thought, yes, I'll just do it. And she did it, totally unlike most clerks on the desks of most police forces in this country. Luckily, her inspector, who'd just come on duty, was an Irishman who'd been working for the Metropolitan Police for 25 years, and he saw this, and he was about to retire. And he said, oh, Christ, I've been looking for something like this for 25 years. He said, I'll get it to the right place. And he knew about the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity unit, and so it went to them. They rang me up and said, could you come round to Belgravia police station to explain all the evidence you've got of war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. Now, over the following 3 weeks, I had 5 3-hour sessions in Belgravia police station explaining all the stuff in detail, what the law says, what has been happening, in particular with each one of the 25 people we had put on the list needing to be prosecuted. We rather wanted at the time to get it to look like the Nuremberg war crimes trials with 20 German leaders prosecuted by us. We want 25 of our leaders hopefully prosecuted for genocide. So that's what we did, and they had it, the Crown prosecution, the police initially thought, there's nothing to this, we just have to do it, But after a couple of hours of going through the evidence, they were quite convinced, that's what the law says, this is what has happened, it's quite obvious a criminal offence of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. So they then eventually passed all the information over to the Crown Prosecution Service, and the woman who was dealing with it, a senior woman, after 4 weeks, we hadn't heard anything, we were getting a bit worried, and then she was promoted to a senior job in Lancashire or somewhere. And they passed the case to the most junior person in Ludgate Hill in the Crown Prosecution Service. But 6 weeks after that, we got a letter from them saying, well, we're not going to go ahead with the prosecution of Blair, Straw, Hoon, Goldsmith and all the rest, and the chiefs of the defence staff and everybody else who was involved, on the grounds that you have not provided evidence of intent to commit genocide, intent to commit crimes against humanity, or intent to commit war crimes. Now, actually, we had produced pages of evidence of intent. And you can tell, I'll give you some examples in a minute, but anyway, what happened was that they turned it down, and so we did it again, and about 6 months later, they came back with the same answer. You have not provided evidence of intent. And we said, look, it's not up to us to provide the evidence of intent. That's what the Crown Prosecution Service is all about. They have to prove that in court. We are just witnesses reporting the crimes. We don't have to prove this anyway. So they turned it down. Now, interesting enough, the DPP in charge of the Crown Prosecution Service was Keir Starmer. So he was committing offence under 7D there of perverting the course of justice in connection with an offence. He knew perfectly well that it was a criminal offence, but he turned it down. He perverted the course of justice. So that's what we have to prove. And this is one of the reasons I'm telling you all of this is that unless we get lots of people around the country in different places starting things locally and moving it across a lot of people, they can pick people like me off very quickly and say, oh, it's just rubbish or whatever, and he died accidentally. So it's important that other people know all of this information and start to take action on it. And the first action is to do with the trust, and then after that we start prosecutions of war criminals, both for starting the wars and doing all the things they do, and for funding it. And so we need to start prosecuting the directors of the banks who provide massive amounts of money to the British government as loans for the next war, so they can pay for more ships, more aircraft, submarines and so on. And this is happening all the time. Anyway, so that is the important thing. Now, just to get to number 8 on that 12, Article 8 of the Scottish International Criminal Court Act, the mental element. And this is the bit that they said we had not provided evidence. In fact, we had provided masses. A person is regarded as committing such an act or crime only if the material elements are committed with intent and knowledge. A person has intent in relation to conduct where he means to engage in the conduct, and in relation to a consequence where he means to cause the consequence or is aware that it will occur in the ordinary course of events. Knowledge means awareness that a circumstance exists or a consequence will occur in the ordinary course of events. Now, some of the things that we reported when in Belgravia police station were what was said by our leaders and what was done by our leaders. And so, for instance, one thing you can prove is that if you give the order to fire a cruise missile from a submarine in the Indian Ocean into Kandahar or Kabul or whatever it is, you know when you fire that missile, because of the design of the missile, that when it lands it will explode and anybody in the vicinity will be injured or killed. So that is clear knowledge of what will occur in the ordinary course of events. So it is very important to understand how to hold them to account in law for what they are doing. I'll give you an example. In the debate to the Iraq War on March the 18th, 2003, it was introduced by Tony Blair, and there was a 7-hour debate, if you can call it that. but there was. And the last person to speak was Jack Straw, who was the Foreign Secretary. And he said, we've had a good debate tonight, and we now know that the decision we take tonight will have consequences, and some of our troops may be killed, so too will innocent Iraqi civilians. I urge you to vote with the government tonight. Now, that couldn't be more plain that he knew that by waging that war, we were going to kill innocent Iraqi civilians, not because of anything they'd done, but because of who they were. It's just they happened to be in Iraq, and so we're going to get rid of them. We're killing them. And that is a crime of genocide, and we'll go to it in a minute. But that is the important thing, is to remember that when he was doing that, he was showing clear intent to commit a crime of genocide. The bit that really got me upset was that then 412 MPs marched through the I lobby and we started the Iraq War. So all those 412 MPs are guilty of a crime of genocide. They knew they were killing innocent Iraqi civilians, men, women and children. Now, the last thing is also important. One of the reasons they give for not doing anything is that, well, we have Crown immunity. In Parliament, you can say anything you like, and you can never get prosecuted for it. Now, you can never have a criminal offence against you. Never a civil offence against you of accusing somebody of something you haven't done or whatever it is. However, that does not apply to criminal offences. It does not apply to genocide, to crimes against humanity or war crimes. These are the world's worst crimes. And when we signed the Rome Statute and the Queen signed it and it came into force, she, for the first time in 1600 years, put all of us under the jurisdiction of an outside law enforcement authority. And I was staggered when I found this out, that no one knew about it. This is a fundamental. For the first time in history, we can be charged with an offence and put in front of the International Criminal Court in The Hague and prosecuted by them, not by our people. And I think that's very important that everybody knows that. It is horrendous that it can happen. So the last point here is very important. They come up with these excuses, but this is what Article 29 says, Crown application. This Act binds the Crown and applies to persons in the public service of the Crown and property held for the purposes of the public service of the Crown as it applies to other persons and property. In other words, it applies to everybody, including the monarch, the Prime Minister, the Attorney General, all MSPs, all MPs, everybody, including all of us, as it applies to everybody. So that is, I think, the main law, that if you go away tonight and you understand that and read through it 2 or 3 times until you're absolutely clear about it, you know from then on you're standing on the law. This is the law that has been agreed by 124 nations. And in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which is the international agreement to set it up in the first place, there are these 6 crimes. War crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, and conduct ancillary to war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. And those apply in 124 nations. And they apply, as it says in Article 27, I'll just go to that, on page 3, if you look at the first corky dot, you'll see it says 27.1. And this is coming from the Rome Statute, irrelevance of official capacity. This is what we need our leaders to know. And hopefully we can pass this video to all our MPs and MSPs and anybody else, because they are subject to this just as anybody else is. This statute shall apply equally to all persons without any distinction based on official capacity. In particular, official capacity as a head of state or government, a member of a government or parliament, an elected representative or a government official shall in no case exempt a person from criminal responsibility under this statute. immunities or special procedural rules which may attach to the official capacity of a person shall not bar the court from exercising its jurisdiction over such a person. That's a very clear statement that puts the monarch, the Prime Minister, every one of our MPs, MSPs and so on in the dock for what they've been doing. So that is the international statement, and it is translated into domestic criminal law in Scotland with the previous one I told you about, Article 29 of the International Criminal Court Scotland Act. Okay, so I don't want to go through all these laws, but the important bit is that you have it in writing, and the more you understand everything that's said in here, the more strength it will give you to stand up to what's going on. And if you can marry that with other people and have a group of you doing these things together, that's even better. So let's move on to genocide. I talk about this word, and a lot of people I've spoken to, particularly lawyers, who say, oh, it's not genocide. No. Of course, they don't pay any attention to the law. And genocide is brought into effect with the International Criminal Court Scotland Act and the International Criminal Court Act of 2001, and it's defined very clearly in the legislation. And something that they don't know about, and none of them seem to even refer to, is at the top of page 5, number 13. I'm hoping this will be unlucky for them. The schedule to the International Criminal Court Act 2001, Elements of Crimes Regulations, specifies the elements of genocide that must be proved beyond reasonable doubt in court if a jury is to find a person guilty of the crimes of genocide or conduct ancillary to genocide. Now, these are important, these statements. So Article 6, there's different types of genocide. One of them is genocide by killing. And the second one is genocide by causing serious bodily or mental harm. And there are others, but these are the two I want to concentrate on. The perpetrator killed or caused the death of one or more persons. A lot of people say to me, well, surely genocide is when you kill lots of people. But what's written into our legislation is it's one or more persons. So even if one person is killed by your actions because of the fact that they are a member of a national, ethnic, racial or religious group, not because they've done anything to you, that is a crime of genocide. Well, it's the first of the 4 criteria met. The second person is such person or persons belong to a particular national, ethnic, racial or religious group. That is what's written into the legislation as to what genocide is when you kill a person because they're a member of that group, not because of they've committed a crime or they've done anything to you or they've harmed Britain or anybody else. The third one is the important one from the point of view of persuading the Crown Prosecution Service to do something. The perpetrator intended to destroy, in whole or in part, that national, ethnic or racial or religious group as such. So you have set out now. And the last one is the conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against that group or was conduct that could itself effect such destruction. Now, when you go to war with somebody and you start the process of killing, if you just have one incident, one missile is fired and it kills half a dozen Afghans, and our government says, oh, we didn't mean to do that, we're not going to do it again, then that's not genocide. This is where they do the same thing 40,000 times. And that's roughly what they did in attacking innocent Afghans in Afghanistan. And even more in Iraq, and what they're doing right now in the Yemen and the Ukraine. So we know that wars are going on, and our leaders are supporting it with our money. So the first thing Keir Starmer did when he got into power was to send £3 billion of our money to the Ukraine for them to buy more weapons and train up more troops and so on to attack Russia. I mean, one of the worst decisions, I couldn't believe it when I heard that. But that is an example of a person committing genocide by killing. Each one of those 4 criteria can be proved easily in a court of law in relation to Keir Starmer or Tony Blair or Lord Goldsmith or Dominic Pearce or Suella Braverman or whoever it is, Rishi Sunak and so on. They are taking the decisions which lead to the deaths of one or more persons of a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. In this case, it's a national group. It was in all of those cases members of a national Iraqi group or Afghan group or Libyan group or Syrian group. We were killing them because of who they were. So it's important to know that. And the thing that it's all written, you can look any of this up in much more detail by going to the headings that I've got on here. I haven't put all the references, but for each statement I have given you a pointer to the law that you can look up for yourself. And that's the Elements of Crimes Regulation.